Alrighty, this is episode 3. I'm very lucky and fortunate to have the first woman of boxing, Jackie Kallen, as my third guest. Um, I've listened to a lot of your interviews before this because I didn't want to be redundant and ask the same old. So I'm going to try to dig in a little bit more. Um, I know about the story. When you were in high school, you invited the Rolling Stones over to your house and they obliged. So you had Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, the whole crew hanging out with a 17-year-old high school student. Is that right?
That is so true. That's funny that you should dig up that old story, but that was my high school graduation. Everybody else was going to high school graduation parties, and I went to see the Rolling Stones. It was their first American tour, and I had set up an interview with them after the concert and just happened to ask them what they were doing the next day because they had a layover between actually Detroit and Chicago. So they had the day free. And I said, well, how about spending it with me and my family? We'd be happy to have you. And that's how it happened. And it was a lot of fun. We had a good time. They got a kick out of an American family. They wanted to drive on the other side of the road. That was different for them. And they wanted to go shopping to an American mall. And we did that. And then I did end up taking them to a party, a graduation party with a lot of my friends. So they got to interact with some American teenagers. So it was fun for us to be with them. And it was fun for them to be with us.
How so that and that's where that's it seems like that's your superpower. You have like a social courage and you're not uncomfortable approaching anybody. Would that be accurate?
You know, it started when I was really, really young. I won a date with a TV star when I was 13, and everybody was like nervous for me, thinking, I'm 13 years old, I'm going to be so nervous. And I wasn't. His name was Ricky Nelson. He was from a big TV family back in the day. And I found that I just had no nerves whatsoever. I just felt really comfortable with him. And I asked him a million questions about life in California, about Hollywood, about show business. And I realized that I could talk to anybody about anything. I didn't have any sense of apprehension. And that was really a good thing to find out at 13 because that opened the doors to my being a reporter. Because from that day on, I've interviewed presidents, vice presidents, huge stars, movies, TVs, sports, music, and whether it was a Michael Jackson and Elvis or Donald Trump or Bill Clinton, it was the same. I felt basically the same with anybody I was talking to, which, like you say, it is really a gift.
Did you know before that first opportunity to meet him that you had that gift? Like, was it apparent you weren't finding that social anxiety in challenging situations?
I didn't know till I was put in that situation that I just felt the same as everyone I was with. I didn't feel any differently because someone was in a different career. I didn't feel that anyone was above or below anybody else. We just all had different jobs. And some people just had a more interesting life. But I wasn't uncomfortable with anybody, whether they were president of the United States or whether they were the biggest movie star on the planet. Being that I was with the press, I felt they needed me as much as I needed them. They wanted the publicity. So I felt that it was mutually beneficial. They got the publicity, I got the story. Everybody was happy.
So, was that something? I mean, I heard that in a previous interview as well. You had said you see everybody the same, and I think it's a great way to see things. Whether you're a janitor or CEO, you're both human beings. You have feelings. You both live the same lives. You put the pants on one leg at a time. Was that something you were taught, or is that something that you just came to understand?
I think that was something basically I was taught. My mother was very involved with civil rights back in the 60s, and my brother and I were taken on marches. We were taught from an early age, black, white, young, old, Catholic, Jewish, Muslim. It really didn't matter. We all laugh at jokes. We all cry when we're hurt. And basically, we're all God's children, so no one is any better than anyone else. No one group is any better than any other group. And we're all just individuals that try to make it through this life the best we can. And I was able to see the world through those eyes, and it equalized everybody to me. So if I was with a movie star or with my next door neighbor, it was exactly the same. There was no difference. We would talk the same, we would laugh the same. And, I didn't feel any difference as far as, oh, I'm nervous because you're the president, and I'm not nervous because you're my next door. I'd never felt a difference.
Do you feel like taking that approach to interviewing such important and powerful people, do you feel that that sort of brought them down to earth in the interviews and made it more candid than if you sort of put them on a pedestal?
100%. It made all the difference in the world because I actually became very friendly with a lot of the people that I interviewed. I started inviting people to my house. That was kind of my thing. If I liked you and we had a good rapport, I'd invite you over if you had time before or after a concert or before or after whatever you were in town for. And then we'd stay in touch. I would get numbers and take pictures with everybody and make sure they got a copy so they'd remember who I was. Next time they were in town, if I called, they'd remember. And I just thought the most important thing in life are relationships, networking, the people that we meet and the people that we meet through them and the people that they can meet through us. So I've always been really big on networking. I like putting people together. If I know someone that I think would be good for your show, I'm going to tell you, gee, you should call Tommy Hearns, you should call Michael Nunn, you should call whoever, because that's important that we do that for each other. And that's just been part of my life. So, yeah.
Awesome. And my last two guests didn't recognize it. It's kind of cut off. I don't know if you can see all of it. Does my background look familiar to you at all?
No pain, no gain. I see that. Right behind you, no pain, no gain.
So I did this. It was a mimic of the original Kronk Gym, the yellow and the red, and then the
Yeah.
banner that Manny had up. So obviously, the journey starts with Tommy. I think everyone knows that part. But taking a step back from that and with that same theme, I think there's a lesson to be taken from that as well, because it's not very often that you see, an inner city, black kid, a fighter, and somebody from the suburbs, a Jewish woman, become best of friends. And that's what you both did. How does that come to be?
It's real interesting to me that you just said that because I just hung up with him. We became friends. It was a gradual thing. He was young, 20 years old. I was 32. He's black, I'm white. He's Christian, I'm Jewish. All the differences that you can imagine. But underneath it all, we just grew to trust each other. He hadn't been around a whole lot of, white women my age. And he had to understand why I was there. I was there to do a story on him initially. I was there as a publicist for him and for the whole Kronk Gym. I set up all his interviews, weigh-ins, press conferences, things like that. And little by little, we got close. When it was time for him to buy his first car, I went with him to show him how to get the best deal. Don't just pay the price that they quote. Same when he bought his first house. He came to my children's birthday parties. I went to his weddings. He came to my kids' weddings, my kids' bar mitzvahs. We became almost like, well, we are family. My kids look at him as family. My grandkids look at him as family. And, he's one of the people I'm closest to for 45 years now. If he needs something middle of the night, pick up a phone, Jackie, can you do this? It's done. And if I need something signed or I need something for a celebrity auction or whatever, I don't hesitate to ask. And we go to lunch, we go to fights together, and I'm very friendly with his kids. He's very friendly with mine. My little grandkids just adore Uncle Tommy. He's the best. And we kind of proved that friendship has nothing to do with age or ethnicity or any kind of background. It's in your heart.
That I love that, and I think it's It's important to notice too, like just treat a human like a human. We are all very similar. We all have very similar needs, no matter where we come from, and I think that's a barrier that gets lost. I think it's amazing. An amazing thing, the bond that you had with Tommy and that you had with him still.
That's a beautiful thing about boxing, though. Boxing seems to be colorblind. You walk into a gym and you see Arab kids with Asian kids, with white kids, with black kids. The trainers are different colors. It doesn't seem to make a difference because the main common denominator is boxing, is winning. And you spar with whoever's there to spar in your weight class. I was always the only woman, and I pretty much still am after all these years. There's not a lot of women in our business. And I never felt different, because of that. I never let that be separation for me. I never let it be a barrier. I never tried to hide the fact that obviously I don't look like the guys, but I never tried to dress down, not wear makeup, try to be one of the boys. I didn't feel that that was necessary. I knew as much about boxing as they did. They tested me. I passed the tests. And after 45 years, they don't test me anymore. I'm just like the OG. I'm just there.
I love that. So I know obviously there are a lot of challenges when you're in a male-dominated world, and I think your approach to it's awesome too because you're like, yeah, there are, but so what? I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna make my way. They're gonna act the way they're gonna act, but I'm gonna show that I'm qualified to do this. Were there ever times where perhaps being female helped you and gave you an advantage?
I think it did help because publicity wise, I got a lot of attention. I'd be in the fights with Tommy or more so with James Toney, who was my own fighter, who I managed, and I worked the corners for him. So every fight you'd see on TV, there I was. And it was an anomaly. People were wondering, who is that blonde that's in the corner with him? Is it his girlfriend? Is it his wife? Does my husband manage him? People were just curious. And that curiosity got me a lot of publicity. And that publicity led to a movie. And that
That's
movie led
right.
to The Contender and led to two books and led to speaking engagements and other ancillary streams of revenue and things that, I enjoy doing that all kind of came off of the fact that I stood out. And when you're a fish
Yeah.
out of water, you either survive or you don't.
Here's something I actually just I didn't have this as a question, but I just thought of it as you're saying all this. I managed one fighter, and it was certainly difficult. Sometimes it's a lot more busy than others when you're coming close to the fight, and maybe an opponent drops out or something. But when we had our baby, I decided to stop managing. I figured it just wasn't worth it anymore. I wanted to focus on that. How hard is it being a mom and managing fighters and a wife and managing fighters? Was there a
Well,
dynamic that made that challenging?
when I started, I had teenage boys. Well, when I started with Tommy, they were 7 and 8. So I was back and forth being mom and being publicist. But what I did was I decided to combine them and take them to training camp. So here's these two little white boys when Tommy's training for the first Leonard fight, and it was very exciting. They didn't know that it was a historic event that they were part of and that they would have that memory forever. It was just mom's taking us to work with her. But when I started managing like James Toney, they were all the same age. And I kind of combined motherhood and a career. I didn't keep them separate. I didn't try to compartmentalize. I just threw it all in a big kettle and just embraced it all. If I had fighters living at the house, I'd have my boys take them under their wings. I made them feel part of it. I'd say, take them to school with you, or, go out as they got older. If you're going to a party, take them with you. Take the guys with you. They go shopping, they take my kids with them. It was a very family atmosphere, and it's always been like that, and it still is. The interesting thing is that when I started, the fighters were a lot older than my kids. Then they became the same age as my kids. And then as I continued managing, they became the ages of my grandkids. Now my fighters are younger than my grandkids. So, it changes, but they're still all part of my family.
And that's interesting too, because it sort of seems like that's a similar dynamic to being 13, 17, 18, and having rock artists come to the house and swim in the pool. It sort of sounds like it's an extension of the family still.
Well, that's how it was because when my kids were teenagers and I was writing for the paper, I would like invite Kiss over, for example. And Kiss was always in full makeup. No one ever saw them without makeup. But they're not going to come to my pool on a Saturday afternoon with their makeup on. So my kids were excited because they got to be with Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley without the makeup and got to know them as people. And then that night we'd go to the concert and they'd see them as Kiss. It was really educational and interesting for them. And I think that my boys would tell you that they had an extraordinary upbringing because they met and interacted with so many celebrities and athletes and they learned that they're just like everybody else. And a lot of people don't know that because you're not exposed to them. So I think it was really good. My boys can hold their own with anybody. They're very well versed and they've been exposed to traveling the world with fights. We've been to Europe at a young age. They were able to go to fights in France, and it's just been a wonderful lifetime. And now I can share it with my grandchildren, which is really wonderful too, because I've been in the business so long that I can't imagine not being in boxing. It's something I love so much.
That brings another question too, which is one thing I've noticed with everybody who's been in boxing for a certain amount of time. It's like you can't leave it. You'll do it forever. What do you think it is about boxing that just keeps a hold on you to just keep coming back?
Well, it's a great sport. It's a one-on-one sport. There's no team behind you. The training that goes into it is so intense, and you're very dedicated. In order to be a champion, it takes a very special kind of a person. And I'm very dedicated in everything I do. So I respect that same dedication in the people that I work with. And I think the excitement of taking a young fighter from the amateurs all the way up through the ranks and seeing that world title belt around their waist, knowing that you were part of that, you made that happen. There's no feeling like that. So I'm always looking for that next world champion that I'm going to find and take him all the way. I've got Mike Quan Williams now, who's out of Connecticut, and he's had 25 fights now, no losses, knock wood, and he's right on the cusp of a title fight. And I'm as excited about him getting the world title as I was for Tommy when he fought Pepino Cuevas in 1980, or James when he fought Michael Nunn in 91. That excitement hasn't worn off. I still feel that same passion. And as long as I still feel that, I'm going to continue doing it. If I ever lose that enthusiasm or where I don't feel that way, then I probably wouldn't want to do it. But right now, I'm still so passionate about it. As a matter of fact, my very first fighter is from right there in Chicago, Bobby Hitz, who
Bobby Hits
you
has a show
probably
tomorrow
know.
night.
He's a promoter there. He's got a show tomorrow night, as a matter of fact. And Bobby was my first fighter that gave me the chance to be a manager. I really give him credit because he calls himself the guinea pig because he was the first one that was willing to take the ridicule of having a lady manager. He got teased a lot, and he was a great sport about it, and that opened the door to other fighters. So I owe a lot to Bobby Hitz.
I just remembered something, and I don't know if I had read this in a book about you or if Bobby had told me, but you used to train with him, right? Like to the extent of holding his feet for him when he was doing sit-ups and I don't know if you were holding the bag, but doing the workouts with him.
I was
What
very hands-on. I was a lot younger back then, but it was fun for me to buy him really nice outfits and make my fighter go to the gym and look like $1,000,000 and yeah, wipe him down and bring him his water. I felt like I was doing something. I felt like I was participating. And I wanted the fighters to see that I wasn't just a manager in name only, that I cared for my fighters and that I was very much involved. And so, yeah, Bobby was my very first experiment, and very successful. We're still really good friends today. He's a great guy.
Absolutely. He told me another story. I don't know your son's names, but one of your sons got in trouble at school because he kept telling stories as the teacher thought it was. So the teacher's like, "You got to stop making up these stories." You had, Gene Simmons at your house. You had, Tommy Hearns at your house, and they called. From what I
That's
understand, they
exactly
called
what
you and
happened.
said like, "Hey,
It
he's
was
been like lying up a story."
it was after Kiss was at our house, and then I had a couple of the Detroit Tigers come over, and everybody was just hanging out, and they went to school the next day. And Paul Stanley of Kiss drew a picture of himself for my son and took it to school. And he said, "Oh, yeah, Paul Stanley was at my house yesterday and he drew this picture for me." And they called me and they said, "Your son has a problem. He tells little stories at school, and, we want to teach him that's not nice to tell stories." I said, "Well, what did he say?" They said, "Oh, he was saying that he had, oh, the pitcher from the Tigers was playing ball with him, and then Kiss came to the pool, and then he went to the concert, he was backstage, all those silly little lies." I said, "Well, so far, everything you're saying is true." And, so what I did was I took one of the Detroit Tigers to school, and he explained to the children that, my son wasn't lying, that his mother's a reporter, and so she has access to a lot of famous people, and that different people have different jobs. And it actually became a learning moment for everybody.
That is such an amazing story, though. That is so funny. You can't even make that up.
You couldn't, because when the teacher called me, she says, "We have a problem." I said, "Do we? Your son has been telling lies." And I went, "I don't think so." But yeah, it was interesting. But yeah, they when you have people like that, I mean, Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, Paul Anka, all the different Tom Jones, I would take them to Vegas and they'd run around with Joe Lewis's son, and they'd hang in the locker room with Don Rickles and all these people. And so it was a very glamorous lifestyle for a young kid. And when they would tell people about it, I think that a lot of people thought they were maybe fabricating it, but that was their childhood.
It's so great. So, when you came to the Kronk to cover your first story, what year was that?
Oh, well, I was sent to do an interview with Tommy Hearns when he turned pro. He turned pro in the end of 77, so it was in early 78. And I went to do a story on him. Then I did a story on Emmanuel Stewart. Then I did a story on Mickey Goodwin, who was another fighter. And then Emmanuel, gave me the opportunity to be the publicist for the whole gym. And, no one knew what a Kronk was. You're like, "What is a Kronk gym? What is that?" And so, it was up to me to kind of get the word out that there was this hot gym in Detroit with some really good fighters. Of course, there were only two at the time, and then we got Hilmer Kenty and Milt McCrory and Stevie McCrory and Jesse Paul and Jimmy Paul and Danny Paul and, all the fighters that came after that. But it was fun for me to try to get that name out there and, let people know what was coming out of Detroit, what we were doing. And my first experience, I had never been to a boxing gym. So when I walked in there, it was extremely hot at Kronk. Kronk, they kept it over 100 degrees. It was easy for people to make weight because they could sweat it off in a day. And I was not aware of anything called a cockroach. I'd never seen one. I didn't know what they were in my neighborhood. We didn't have them. And at the Kronk gym, because of the humidity, and it was in the basement, there were a lot of cockroaches. Well, I had never seen one. And I didn't notice that one had crawled into my purse. And on the way home from the gym, it decided to come out of my purse and get on my lap while we were driving. I almost had an accident, and I was very, very reluctant to go back down there because I'm not a fan of cockroaches. but we became very friendly. After a while, I didn't even pay attention to them anymore. If there was one on my arm, I would just flick it off. It's amazing what you can get used to. And I got used to the
Yeah,
smells, the sounds, just the whole vibe of the gym. And, it became like my office. And no one would go down there. My girlfriends would never want to go down there. They said it was too loud, it smelled, it was, no one wanted to go there. But I love the gym. I love the energy. I love the sound of the speed bag, the heavy bag. I love watching the guys train and sweating and getting in those workouts, the jump rope and the medicine ball and everything it takes to get in that kind of shape to go 12 rounds. It's really grueling. And I learned
yeah.
to love the gym. At the beginning, it was a very foreign place. Now it's home.
I'd have to imagine at 100 degrees in a basement, it probably stunk so badly in there too.
It definitely assaulted you. I mean, as you walked in, first the wave of the heat and the humidity, and then the odor of everybody working and sweating and the bugs crawling around. I mean, it was very different from, I'm used to going to lunch and shopping with the girls. This wasn't a typical day for me, but it became my norm. And then I ended up owning my own gym, but my gym wasn't like that. My gym was upstairs and it was carpeted and it was very, very nice. Different.
Let me ask this, because you had to have been a critical piece of the Kronk becoming what it became. Obviously, Manny's a huge part of it. When did you realize that there was something special going on in that cockroach-filled basement?
I would say in the early 80s. First Hilmer got his title in March of 80, and then Tommy got his in August of 80. And then little by little were the title defenses, having Muhammad Ali around, having some of the greats, Howard Cosell, some of the Gil Clancy's and the really big names in the sport, being around Joe Louis, being in Detroit. Some of the people that I got to be around were so iconic and so legendary. And the name Kronk started to become very well known in boxing circles. The red and the yellow that's behind you, those colors, people weren't used to seeing red and yellow together. Those are not colors that normally you would see together. And, I proudly wore my leather jacket. I still have my Kronk jacket. And it was something that you became very proud of, being from Detroit, being from the Kronk gym. I mean, I remember going to fights in Vegas in the 80s, early 80s, 80 to 84, 85. People didn't really know what Kronk was, and I had press kits with Kronk gym across the top, red and yellow, and pictures of all of the different fighters. And, as the years went on, we had more and more fighters under that Kronk name. And just being part of that, setting up all the photo shoots for the Milton McCrorys and, the Davy Lee Armstrongs and the Brett Summers. And I mean, I can go on and on. There were so many, many names that you may not even recognize some of them because you're young. And, we're talking 40 years ago. But
I think, yeah,
it was really something to see because everyone that walked through those doors had to be good. You couldn't be mediocre, you couldn't be average, and you certainly couldn't be bad because you'd get weeded out quickly. There was better sparring at the Kronk gym than most fights. You'd see more going on just in the sparring than you would see in an average fight. Everybody was just on the level 10 at all times. And so it was a very intense experience and being part of it, being part of that evolution is something that, I'll never be able to forget because it was a big learning curve for me. Emmanuel taught me how to wrap hands. He taught me how to stop cuts. I didn't know what, Avertine was. I didn't know what, any of the things that we did. I didn't know the difference between 1 inch, 2 inch gauze tape. I didn't know any of those things. I didn't know the difference between styles, between a southpaw and an orthodox fighter. I didn't know uppercuts from left hands and right. I learned and I took the time to really digest everything that I saw. And, I could never, ever equate that education to anything else. That was really my college education, was those years at Kronk.
Actually, I'll take a sidestep because I have another question about Manny. But one thing I think is important to address too, and I'm sure you talk about this all the time in your speaking engagements, but I think it could be very helpful for a lot of people watching. How did you get to that point where you have the courage to say, "Hey, I'm going to do this. I don't know anything about it. Yeah, I don't know the uppercut from a hook or a jab from a straight, but I'm willing to put in the work and learn all of it and be a stranger until I'm an expert." What was it that got you to that point?
Well, I'm not afraid to ask questions. So if I don't know something, I will ask because I want to know. You're never too old to learn and you never know it all. So I asked, why are you doing that? Why did you put the Vaseline there? And why did you make it so thick there? And, I would ask every little question about the mouthpiece. Why don't you like the ones that you boil? You had to go to the dentist and have special ones made that cost $100. Why not just dip it in the boiling water? I wanted to know everything there was. What's the difference between a Reyes glove and an Everlast glove? And what's the difference between, a rival glove? And, I wanted to know everything because I felt if I was going to be involved in this world and be tested every day by the guys that thought I knew nothing, I better have the answers. So I made it a point to just ask. And I figured what's the worst they can do is say, I'm not going to tell you or what. But everybody was so great. The guys were so open with me. And I think they knew that they got the sense that I was serious. I was a real true fan of the sport. And I was there to learn and to help them to look as good as they could look, to represent them to the media the best I could, to get them interviews, to do the weigh-ins properly, to have all the press conferences well attended. And I think they learned to trust me. And so if I asked a question, I got an answer. And I think being a woman helped me a great deal because maybe there was something nurturing. There's that whole mother instinct that maybe guys are comfortable around women. But it ended up, I think, being a plus for me. At the end of the day, I would say it was a plus.
And how do you think, just going back to the Kronk and the culture, because you were touching on it, like the culture is absolutely the one of the most intense fighting cultures you can be in. But every time you listen to Manny talk, at least like in interviews, sometimes when he's talking to his fighters, he seems like such a sweet guy. So how did that culture stay maintained in that gym at the highest level of intensity?
You mean when it went from being sweet and low key to that fierceness that it became, where like it was the hell that you walked into when you walked in that gym, you knew you were going to be baptized through fire, like that kind of thing?
Yeah, how did that culture get maintained? Like what went into that?
I think a lot of it was the attitudes of the fighters that were in the original Kronk. They were hungry street kids. None of them came from well-to-do families in the suburbs, like a lot of the fighters that came along later. These were hungry kids. These were kids whose backgrounds weren't real privileged, and they were hungry, and they were very competitive. You went in that door to the Kronk gym, and you had to fight for your respect. You got in there to spar, and you better do the best you could or you'd get knocked out. There was no fooling around. Nobody went easy on anybody. Nobody said, oh, well, you got a fight coming up, so I'm not going to go hard on you. It was like, I'm going to give you everything I got so that when you do get in that fight, it's going to seem like nothing compared to what we just did. And the intensity, Emmanuel created that atmosphere of fierce competitiveness where even if you were just in there sparring and you were giving somebody a couple rounds, you gave them hard rounds. And so it was 100% business. There was no goofing around. Nobody was like just playing. It was like no gym I've ever been at where everybody was like at 100% all the time. I mean,
Yeah.
I owned and ran my own gym, and it was pretty fierce because James Toney would make sure he had that same mentality. You came there to spar, you better spar, and you don't get out until he tells you that he's done. So our gym, Galaxy Gym had that same kind of a feel. But I've been to gyms that are a lot more casual. You get in, you spar a couple rounds, you get out. Not a Kronk. You got in there and you fought for your life every day. And there were people there who were like the instigators. They would be at the edge of the ring yelling, fresh meat, we got some fresh meat. And they would just egg you on. I mean, it was a very difficult place if you didn't have it in you. If you didn't have a lot of heart, they'd run you out of there. I saw guys crying in that gym. So you really had to have skill to last there.
And also, like, obviously, I was talking to Sam Colonna about this, and he made a great point that it's one thing to inherit a lot of good fighters. This guy's 25 and 0, and then you start training him. He's pretty proven at that point. But to take young kids from the amateurs to the pros and then make them champions and do it not once, not twice, not three, but several, many times. What was it about Detroit at that point in time? Was it something in the water? Was it just maybe the economy and where it was at created a lot of hungry fighters? Like, and how come it's not, I hate to say this, but how come it's not quite like that now in Detroit or Chicago or anywhere?
Love to know the answer to that. I really would, because the 80s and even into the 90s, it was like that. And then it just started to drop off. Kids were going into other sports. They were going into basketball, football, whatever. They weren't coming to the gym. The amateur program was just getting diluted. Kids weren't going into boxing. And so Golden Gloves was not the same. PAL wasn't the same. There was just less of an amateur program, and so there weren't as many good fighters. In the 80s, the gym was the place to go, and everyone that came in that gym was top notch. And the 90s was the same way. I mean, you came into the gym, my gym, Galaxy, where James Toney trained, you better be ready to just get down and get it dirty, because James, I mean, there were times where if the guys were just kind of dogging it and hitting the bag, he'd have our gym manager take all the bags down, say, all you guys are just bag beaters, you don't want to spar, you want to get in here with me, come on. I mean, he ran a tough ship, and it made the fighters better. Bronco McCart and the guys that trained with him, they became champions because they had that attitude. In the 80s and 90s, you fought the best. Leonard, Hearns, Duran, Hagler, they fought each other. Now, I mean, I've never seen anything like it. You go to get a guy a fight, and he wants to know, well, this guy's a southpaw. Oh, this guy's too tall. Oh, this guy, he fought so-and-so who beat so-and-so. So I don't know, I've never seen anything like it. They are so picky these days. How can you be the best if you don't beat the best? How do you say
Totally
that you're the
agree.
best fighter when all you fought were guys 5 and 10? You build a record of 25 and 0, and no one had a winning record. The best you beat was a 12 and 12. That's not boxing in my book. I mean, I'm an old timer, I'm an OG, but to be the best, you beat the best. I'd rather take a guy 18 and 2 that lost to two champions than a guy 25 and 0 against sub-level competition. It's just a different business today.
I couldn't agree more. And I think at this point in time, having a padded up record doesn't do you much good, because the truth is it gets figured out. We have box rec now. You can look, you can see, oh, every record is upside down. So I don't think it has the allure that it might have, like when I think it was it McBride that had a totally padded record when he fought Tyson, or it was one of those guys when he had come back. But I agree with you. There's a guy named William Langston. I don't know if you've seen him, but he's fought on several of Bobby's cards. He's trained by Sam Colonna. That's a guy who lost, I think, his second fight. He lost his fifth fight, and every time he would lose, he'd come back even better. And it's like you sort of he's such a good fighter because he's faced those challenges and he got really close to winning and didn't beat, a top prospect, but he grew from it. And I feel like that's way better than the let down when you get your balloon popped when you're 10-0, 11-0, and you go, okay, let's go to, there's no more showbox. But if there was, it's like you go there and all of a sudden it all comes tumbling down. What was it all for then?
You're so right. And the way you say it is exactly the way it is. I mean, I've seen guys with two, three losses that would clean the floor with the guy that's undefeated because it's a question of who's fought who. I'd rather have a guy, I've had guys that have lost fights. There used to be a fighter named Danny Little Red Lopez. He was a featherweight. That guy would get knocked down every fight and come back and win. I mean, he fought the toughest guys. And when he won, you were cheering for him because he came back against adversity. Nowadays, I see guys that get in against a guy 1-9 and they win and they jump on the ropes in the corner and they raise their, oh, they think they're the best fighter on the planet. I could beat that guy that you just fought. I mean, you're proud of that? Seriously, you really are
Yeah.
proud of that. See, that would not make me proud. I would not want my fighter to jump on the corners like he just beat, Mike Tyson when he beat a guy, 4-12. That, I mean, you need that when you're learning. I agree. You have to build a record, and you're not going to put your guy against undefeated guys all the way up during the 4 and 6 rounders. You want to build their confidence, you want to build their endurance. There's a whole kind of a format, a technique to building a record. But if you don't increase the competition each time that you're building a foundation under the fighter. If you beat a good guy, then a better guy, then a better guy, by the time you get to the top, you've fought some really good guys. Now you fight nobodies all the way up, and everybody under you is like nobody. Now you're against the champion. You're going to get crushed. You have no foundation. You've never fought anybody that challenged you. It's a waste of time. I don't want to waste my time. So if I'm going to manage a fighter that I believe could be a world champion, I'm going to test him along the way. I'm going to give him harder and harder fights. So as he passed this test, let's go on to the next, to the next. So by the time he fights for a title, it's not that big of a difference from his last opponent. But a lot of managers
Absolutely.
don't do that because they don't want to take that risk. They don't want to risk a loss. I'm not afraid of a loss. If my fighter's going to learn from it and he's still going to get a title shot down the line, Bronco McCart lost his 7th fight. Didn't stop me. I knew he'd still be a world champion. You just have to pick carefully. You have to match based on styles. You have to pick a fight for different reasons. Is this going to help my fighter? Is this fighter going to make him a better fighter? Maybe not, but if the money's good, that's a good reason. Or maybe the money's not so good, but it's great exposure. It's on the undercard of a big fight. There's different reasons why you pick a fight. But there has to be a reason. You just don't throw a kid in there because the guy that he's fighting is 0-5 and you're going to get another win. See, that doesn't, for me, that doesn't do it. I don't like that particular style of managing.
I would totally agree. And honestly, I haven't really like done a data analysis, but I think if you looked at a lot of guys who did it that way, they get to the show once, they get on the big stage one time and they get that one fight, and then after that, a lot of times I think it's quitting time for them. It destroys their ego. They can't handle that drop off of losing so badly because
Well, a lot
honestly,
of
that's on the
times, though,
manager for not being honest with them.
a lot of times, like I was going to say, is if they've been spoon fed easy fights and now all of a sudden they're in a tough fight, it's going to be hard for them. They're all of a sudden, here's a guy that could actually fight. What do I do? I'm used to guys I could dominate for 6 rounds. Now I'm in an 8 rounder with a guy who could actually fight. Holy shit. So you're not doing your fighter a service by building him, that kind of a record, because eventually he's going to get in there with someone that's not going to be that easy and he's going to freeze. So you kind of have to slowly build them to the top. And, everybody has their own style. of managing, training, fighting, whatever. I know what's worked for me for all these years, and so I stick to it. And it's worked, so why change it?
I won't ask for oh sorry. I won't ask for the secret sauce, but would you say it's more of a science or an art, uh, matchmaking fighters?
How hard is it to matchmake? You
What I was saying is it
you
a
froze for a
is
minute, so I didn't hear the question.
sorry, that's okay. No, I was asking, is it more of a science or an art to matchmaking?
It's a little
Building
bit
a
of
guy's
both.
record.
It's kind of like handicapping, like for a horse race. For me, I look at the guy that my fighter's fighting, and then I look at everyone that they fought and like see who that person fought. And you go down the line and you try to see the lineage of the fighters and their background because he might fight a guy with a losing record, but everyone he lost to was a really tough guy. And so, and then you see a guy that's like 12 and 0, and you go, oh, 12 and 0. I don't want to, oh, he's undefeated. But he fought bums. My guy fought much tougher guys than that guy ever fought. I'd rather beat an undefeated guy because I know my guy can beat him. The guy that's got the two losses fought guys that are as good as my guy. So that's going to be a little bit tougher fight. So you have to use it is a little science of studying the records, but there's an art to it too because you want to make an attractive fight. You want to make a fight that's going to be good to look at. So if you guys a puncher, you want someone that's going to stand in front of him so he can get off on him a lot. You don't want to match him with a runner, a guy that's going to go backwards and run, and your guy's going to chase him the whole fight. It's going to be an ugly fight. So some of it's an art as far as putting together a pretty fight, a fight that's going to look good. But then the science part is in matching someone with equal skills or somebody who is at an equal par at this particular point of your fighter's career. So yeah, I mean, I don't do the matchmaking. There's always a matchmaker who will bring the fight to me, and then I have to do my research and say yes or no. And I confer with the trainer because the trainer is with him every day. He knows, has he been good? Has he been a little slow lately? Has he had a cold? How's he doing with southpaws? Has he been having problems with southpaws? How's he doing with tall guys? Maybe he hasn't been fighting on the inside really great. Maybe I need to know that all the little things that a trainer could tell you help you in matchmaking. So yeah, there's little pieces to it.
Absolutely. So that brings me to the trainer, and that's a great point too, because I heard in a prior interview you made. I don't think a lot of people realize that's a challenge that happens a lot. Is that the trainer dynamic? Sometimes a fighter maybe they outgrew their trainer, or they feel they outgrew them, or the dynamic. That's a very tough dynamic, regardless, to keep two people together, and one of them has to be on the other one all the time. They start to get tired of them. So don't name any names, I'm not asking you to, but what do you notice if you're noticing a dichotomy and a split between a fighter and a trainer? How do you look at that to say, hey, is the trainer doing wrong? Is he not the right guy? Or is my fighter maybe not taking criticism well? Like, how do you evaluate those situations?
Well,
Because I know they're very
if I
tender.
suspect that there's something a little off, I'll sit them down either together or I might do it individually. I might talk to the trainer and say, what's up? He doesn't seem happy. He doesn't seem motivated. What's up? Is it something you're doing wrong? Is he not responding to you anymore? What are you feeling? And I might go to the fighter and say, what's the problem? He's not teaching you anything. You don't feel like you can get any further than you are with him. Tell me. I want to know. And then I'll sit with both of them and say, what are we doing? Is this working or it's not working? And in most cases, it's like a father-son relationship. A lot of times the trainer's older and it's supposed to be like that, where they can talk about everything together. They're close. I've seen the trainers and the fighters go out together, load money, all kinds of things, drive together to the gym, whatever it might be. But when that harmony isn't there, if it's off, it's not going to be good, because when that fighter comes back at the end of the round, he has 1 minute to listen to what his trainer tells him. And he has to be completely in tune with him so that whatever he's told, he's going to go out there and apply. And if he's not listening, or if he's tuning that voice out because they've had a falling out or whatever, it's not good. I need a very harmonious team, because, as Bobby Hitz says, boxing's a 4-lane highway. He taught me this, and it's true. Here's your fighter, and he has to stay in his lane and just train and fight. Here's a manager. I have to stay in my lane. I have to do the contracts. I have to order the, gloves and whatever I have to do contractually. Then there's a trainer who has to train. He's not the manager. He's not the fighter, but he has to train. And then there's the promoter who sets up the fights. I'm not the promoter. I'm not the trainer. I'm the manager. We each stay in our lane and we get where we're going. Once you start crossing over, it doesn't work. So that's why it's really a good point you brought up, because each person's role is important, but the trainer and the fighter have to be really, really close.
Agree, and I think they almost have to be one and the same. Where like the great fighters understand it so well that it's a conversation at a certain point when they become veterans
That's
of
right.
just like, hey, what's the game plan? Versus you're teaching me. It's like, no, we're going to game plan it together. They're sort of equal parties at a certain point in a fighter's career when he becomes mature enough. I think that's another great point. It is a 4-lane highway, but that's a tough thing with boxing, and I think that's a big part of why it gets so messy. It's 4 lanes that have to stay in their lane,
That's so
but
true.
and it's too many different interests that are going to converge, plus a lot of interest in between. There's networks. There's that promoter may work with a bigger promoter. There's just so many interests that it kind of turns into like an 8-lane highway at a certain point, and it's very hard for everyone to just stay in their lane or even to know what their lanes are.
And that's not including the outsiders, the people that come in and whisper in your fighter's ears and try to tell them something different than what you're saying. I got a better manager for you. I got a better trainer for you. Or you shouldn't be fighting for this guy. You should be fighting for that promoter. And you shouldn't be on that network. You should be on this network. And everybody's got an opinion, and everybody's quick to voice their opinion. And one of the things I learned, as far as for my own self in my life, I don't listen to anybody but my own inner voice. So I don't care what anyone says. If someone gives me something that's constructive, that can help me, I will definitely pay attention. But I don't listen to the gossip in the business. I don't get into anybody else's space. I don't approach anyone else's fighters. I don't tell any other trainer how to train his fighter, any other manager how to manage their. I stay out of all of that because it gets too political. And then it's just stay in your own space. And I do a great job in my own space, and I don't bother with anyone else. I've never been sued, thank goodness. I've never been to arbitration. Just keep your nose clean, do your job, and that's the best you can possibly do. But a lot of people try to steal your fighters. A lot of people try to steal other people's fighters. It's a dirty business, but I'm sure a lot of businesses are the same way.
I mean, I have a day job, so I can't I won't comment on that. But yeah, I mean, that's I've talked to a few people like that where they're like, I think I told Bobby that where I was like, he was saying something about like, oh yeah, it gets so stressful because you have to trust this, this, and this. And I was like, you could run it like corporate America and just have all of these fail safes in place. And he's like, I would never want to be that. And I was kind of like, I get it. I
Bobby's always,
understand where you're coming
Bobby's
from.
always threatening to quit. Bobby's always saying, "Oh, I'm done with fighting. I can't take this anymore. I'm done with fighting. I'm done with boxing." But he's not. Like you said earlier, it gets in your blood, and it's that kind of a sport. You just love it and stay with it.
And there's nothing like the adrenaline. Even being a manager, the adrenaline when your
Yeah.
fighter goes in there and you think, man, did I make the right decision? I really hope this was the right decision. You don't get those butterflies anywhere else. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's a pretty exciting world. And like I said, being one of the only women And after all these years, I'm still one of the only women. And that's surprising to me because I always thought there'd be so many other women that would just come flooding into the business. But it is a tough business, and I can see where a lot of women aren't interested in getting into the down and dirty side of boxing. You have to learn how to swim with the sharks and not get bit. And I've been blessed, 45, 46 years now. And I really consider myself very grateful to have had such a career, to have my, International Boxing Hall of Fame ring to show for it. And the acceptance that I've gotten over the years from the men in the business, it means everything to me because I am still one of the only women that they're around. And, I got a kick out of hearing Rosie Perez say she was the first lady of boxing on the Mike Tyson Jake Paul fight. I went, really? You're the first lady of boxing? Okay. I don't think so, Rosie.
Easy, Rosie. That is funny. Let me ask this because obviously there's a nurturing side to having you as a manager. There's also like I don't know many managers who can wrap hands or cure a cut. I mean, most don't even go near that. She did a lot of the dirty stuff too, but what about the tough conversations? Say you have a fighter who's supposed to be training. The trainer says, "Hey, he hasn't, been in the gym. He's, I don't know where he's at. He's supposed to be here. He didn't show up." What are those tough conversations? And don't name names, but like, what is a tough conversation like that like?
Well, I guess that's why sometimes they call me a badass. I'm really not. I think I'm a really easygoing person. But when it comes to business, I can be tough because you're here for one reason only. You're in this gym because you want to be a world champion. You're here because you want to make money. And yet, if you're not doing what you have to do, don't look at me to do your job for you. I can't get in the ring and fight for a fighter. I can get him to fight, but he's got to get in there and win it. So if he's not doing his share, I'm going to call him on it. And I'm going to, and anybody that's in the business that isn't upfront and straight with each other, you have to be tough because sometimes people do get lazy, or it's not even lazy. Life gets in the way. People have personal problems. They have issues at home. They have issues, like you say, they have a day job maybe, and they're having all kinds. But the point is, when you walk into that gym, you got to have that focus, that narrow focus on one thing, winning and being in the best shape you can be in. And you can't cheat because it will show in the ring. If you don't run, you say, "Oh, I'm going to sleep in today. I'm not going to run. I'm not going to, I'm just not going to do that." Or I'm only going to spar a couple rounds today. I'm not in the mood to do 4 or 5 rounds. I'll do two. Who are you cheating? Yourself. And if I'm your manager and I'm there to make you the best you can be, I'm not going to let you cheat yourself. You're going to get back in there and you're going to spar another couple rounds because you got to go 8 or 10 rounds in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever it may be. Who are you cheating? Not me, you. That loss is
Absolutely.
not going on my record, it's going on your record. And it's going to affect your future paydays. So get your butt in there and do what you got to do. And usually they do, and they're thankful for it later. I've had many, many, many guys say later, "Thanks for pushing me because I needed that push." They don't really want you to just say, "Okay, go home, you've had enough." They want you to push them. I think in most cases, people want that extra encouragement. They want someone to push them that extra mile. And as a manager, that's my job. And if I have to sometimes come down on you a little hard, it's not because I don't care, it's because I do care.
Absolutely. So another interesting question, because that's you've been doing it for so many years. Did you have that perspective when you first started?
No, not so much. At the very beginning, it's like, you want your fighter to like you and you want to be Miss Nice Guy and, oh, you had enough for today. Okay, you go home and come. No, I reached a point where No more Miss Nice Guy. You're not going to get to a title that way. And what am I spending my money buying you your clothes, buying you your shoes, doing this, paying that, and you're not giving me 100%? Why am I giving you 100% if you're not giving me 100%? That's not fair. So you wake up and you just say, being nice isn't always the right way. It's more important to be respected than to be liked. So today you don't have to like me, but you're going to respect the fact that I'm here to make you as good as you can be. Back in that ring and finish your workout, then go home. If you want to be mad at me, be mad at me. And I learned not to care.
Was there a time where you felt like you could make somebody want it as much as you wanted it? Perhaps you could will them to wanting it that much.
Hope so. I hope you want to give encouragement. You want to make somebody want something. And it got to the point where a lot of the guys would say, I want to do this for you as much as for me because I see how much you believe in me. I'm working with someone right now who just said that very same thing to me today. He just said, thank you for believing in me. Thank you for pushing me because knowing that you are behind me makes me want to train that much harder. I think we all want people on our team. We want those cheerleaders, those people saying, you can do this. You will do this. If you believe it, you can achieve it. You want that mindset. And so if I have to come down a little hard, I'm hard on myself. So, I expect other people to be hard on themselves too.
And it's funny you say that because Sam Colonna, when I was talking to him, he said, he was talking about the different ways to speak to a fighter, and one thing that he said was, if they're not mentally strong, you can work on making them mentally strong. And I thought, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, if their whole life their dad told them, you're a piece of garbage, and their brother said you're not going to amount to anything, then you don't really know how they're going to be wired with like positive affirmation because they've never had it. And if you give it to them, you'll be shocked at what they can actually become. I thought that was really powerful and similar to what you're saying right now because some of these kids may have never had that until they got in a ring.
Well, what I learned was that there are two types of fighters. There's the one that thinks he is a world champion after 3 fights. No matter what, he thinks, I could beat anybody. I'm the best. I'm better than this guy. I'm better than that guy. And I have to like bring him down to earth and say, no, you're not. You're not there yet. You'll get there. You've got the skill, you've got the speed, you've got the heart, but you're not there yet. So don't push it because if I put you in with somebody too good too soon, it's not the right move. Slow yourself down. You're not there yet. Then there's the other side of the coin, the guy who doesn't know how good he is, and he's afraid that he's not good when he's really better than what he thinks he is. So he's afraid to fight anybody because he doesn't think he's ready, and he is ready. So you have to work with the minds of a fighter and kind of be honest with where a fighter is. So if he thinks he's ready for a title fight and he's not, you have to explain that. And if he is ready, but he doesn't think he is, you have to explain that. So it's a mental game as much as it is physical. I've seen guys, why did one guy win, or a girl, why did one fighter beat another fighter? Because they wanted it more. Because they were ready that night and they weren't going to leave that ring without the victory. The other person didn't want it as much that night, and it comes down to the mental game of boxing. A lot of it's strategy, because you take two fighters, they weigh the same, they both are in good shape, they had two good camps, they both had the same amount of rounds of sparring. Who wants it more that night? And that's going to make the difference.
Absolutely. And that's when boxing is so beautiful because we all saw Sugar Ray Leonard and how good he was when he could showcase his skills. What was he when he was fighting Tommy Hearns, whose will is this big, just like yours, or Marvin Hagler, and all of them fighting each other just was the adversity that they were all facing and facing each other was what made it so magical to see like Hagler Hearns. What happens when two massive power forces just don't back up an inch, And I think that's the best part.
That was one of the greatest fights I ever was in the corner watching. And, because I was a party and part of all 9 of those fights, that they all 4 of them had, that golden era. It was magical to me to see each of them at the top of their game, fighting each other, that kind of round robin of everybody fighting everybody. But when Tommy fought Hagler, he broke his hand in the first round. And so that was a real big problem because he came back to the corner and his hand was broken. So he was already at a disadvantage, but he still fought his heart out anyways. And then when Hagler got cut, I mean, the whole fight was it was up here. The intensity was so unbelievably high. And you don't get fights like that every day where every second of every round was like that. It was just an incredible fight. I look at the first fight with Tommy and Ray Leonard. That was a 15-round fight back then. If it had been a 12-round fight, Tommy was ahead. He would have won. Those last couple rounds told the tale. But then they fought again, a rematch. Tommy clearly won and got a draw. So boxing isn't always fair. I mean, we've seen some decisions lately that haven't been at all close. And you just scratch your head and go, what were those judges watching? And so, a lot of it is up to the judges. But, when you talk about Hearns, Hagler, Leonard, and Duran, doesn't get much better than those fights.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And by the way, with judges, I still wonder to this day, they're clearly all using some different form of, it's not objective, it's clearly very subjective. And they're looking at different things, or they say, hey, it's the preference of the judge. But to me, and tell me what you think about this, but to me, it's always just been who landed more impact overall. Not more punches or more impact per punch, but just who hurt the other guy more with illegal shots.
Well,
And that's who wins the round.
Once they brought CompuStat in and they started counting the number of punches, which doesn't necessarily tell you the velocity and how hard the hit is, it just shows you could be pitter patter, hitting somebody with little nothings. And they count that because, he hit him 30 times, but they might not have hurt him. And the other guy could have rocked you with one so solid that it cleaned your clock. So judges have different criterias. Some judges judge by aggression. You forced the fight, the other guy fought backwards. But I've seen guys fight backwards that won their rounds, even though they were fighting backwards. So what are you looking at? Are you looking at aggression? Are you looking at activity? Are you looking at whose jab is better? Are you looking at speed? Are you looking at damage? I've seen guys that won the fight and their face looks like they've been through a ringer, lost as clean and looks like, he never was in a fight. So there's a lot of different judging methods, and there's nothing uniform about judging. It's just very subjective, like you said. You might say, well, this guy's older, he's not going anywhere, he doesn't need the win. This young kid, he's just coming up now, he needs that win. If the round is close, give it to the young kid on the way up, not the guy there's a million things. Oh, I want to work for this promoter again, so that's his fighter, so I'm going to see the fight that way so that I get the call to work for him again. I mean, there's all different reasons of why they might see a fight a certain way. But, there should be a more uniform system of how you score each round. I mean, obviously, if there's a knockdown, that there's a difference in the points. But I've seen a lot of close rounds where one judge goes 10-9 this way and the other one goes 10-9 the other way.
And some of them are just really close. But yeah, and that's what I'm telling you. I think it should be a punch spectrum. It starts in the middle. This guy lands a couple of jabs. This guy lands a big right. It goes more his way. And you just sort of go from there. But effective aggression, I don't even know what that means. What if you see some guys that are tackling their opponent and shoving him? It's like, well, that's not boxing.
Right.
I mean, it's part of it, but it's not the part that should be scoring anything,
Right. It's one aspect of the sport that needs a little work, I would say. we should have a judging school somewhere where there's somebody that could, really teach you how to score every round properly, because when you have fights where one judge has it like, 98-92 for one guy, and another one has it 98-92 the other way, how is that even
Yeah,
possible? Are you watching the
absolutely.
same fight?
Absolutely. Jackie, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize I switched chargers and this one is actually I'm at 5%, so it's
That's
about to
okay.
die. So
This has been it's so good that I lost track of the time too. But we've had a great conversation. I've enjoyed it. Anytime you want to continue, you let me know.
absolutely. No, this has been a pleasure, and honestly, I could imagine we could do this for another hour easily because I still have 100 more questions I didn't even ask. But I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for taking this time. I
It's
know you're
my
very
pleasure.
busy.
You asked some very, very good questions. And normally I would be bored after this long with most interviewers, but you were great. You kept it going, and you really are very insightful into the sport.
Thank
So
you. Thank
kudos
you.
to you.
Thank you. That means a ton coming from you. I really do mean that. Just thank you so much for that.
My pleasure. I've done a lot of these, so I know who's good and who's not.